You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholic, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and a trunk, just like Jim. It's more to life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more to life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club, buy some bottles, impress them girls. It's more to life.
Fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And who dat? And welcome back. You know, it's been a while. Kind of took off for Thanksgiving, and then right after Thanksgiving's over, got sick. I don't know if you guys out there can hear it, but I got some crud up in here. But still, vacation, break, sick leave, whatever you want to call it. It's over, and we're back. And man, maybe wasn't the best time to take off, you know, because it was Falcons hate week and all that. But seeing how this would have been a game that I was building up about, being excited about, and really feeling like positive, like if they win this game, that they're pretty much like wrapping up the NFC South, like that would put them 2 games ahead of the Falcons, 3 games ahead of the Buccaneers. Like you could call it quits for the NFC South season, like right then. Like that if they could have won this game, which they lost 24-15, if they would have won this, that it pretty much could have hung their banner like on Monday. But no, alas, the Saints were unable to beat the Falcons, even though there was multiple opportunities, and it was there for the taking, and they just couldn't do it. And it's a game, you know, football is a game of momentum, and this game right here would be a perfect illustration of how the game is a game of momentum, because the Saints and the Falcons both kind of start out just like trading 3-and-outs, you know. And I guess it was the Saints' first drive was just a 3-and-out, and then the Falcons' next drive was a 3-and-out, and then the Saints go just like pretty much just like marched right down the field with some plays assisted from Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. This was before everyone got hurt, but they just marched right down the field, and it's these penalties, you know, they get in the red zone, and then they get a 10-yard holding call or a false start or offensive pass interference, which just knocks them out of like the higher percentage of them possibly being able to get a touchdown. Because like once the Saints get in the red zone, you know, in the 20, inside the 20, it seems like the only way that they ever score touchdowns once they get in the red zone from there is like if they are like inside the 5 already. So like them getting a 5-10 yard penalty when they're already just barely inside the 20 just wrecks their chances of getting a touchdown. And that's what happened on the Saints' second drive there. And so they just had to settle for 3. But then, you know, their defense, for the first time in like 6-7 weeks, their defense actually looked pretty good to start this game. So the Falcons have a couple plays on offense on their second drive and get to midfield, and the Saints actually get another stop and get the ball back. And pretty much just like their second drive, they just pretty much marched right down the field and getting a goal-to-go situation. I think they were like at the Falcons' 8-yard line, but there was a couple plays like leading up to that. So they had like one just like run, I think, by Jamal Williams or Alvin Kamara, and then on second down it was a pass. It was a pass to Rashid Shaheed, and he that there probably should have been either a catch at the 1-yard line or a touchdown to Rashid Shaheed, but he just had to go low to go get it. And when you watch the highlight of it, you see it's more of a body catch. Rashid Shaheed's trying to catch it with his body instead of his hands, and that's what led to it like bouncing right off of his like chest plate. And then we all know what happened on third down, because I was just mentioning momentum. You after this play that happened after the Rashid Shaheed drop, you probably could have just called the end of the game. The Saints could have probably just thrown in the flag at that moment, because the Saints had all the momentum at this point in the game. But before this play, they had all the momentum. Looked like they were about to go up uh, 10 to nothing, and then just Derek Carr makes. I would argue this is probably the worst play that he's had this year, because this was just absolutely awful. And uh, prior to the season starting, during the off season, I talked about Derek Carr and how I was never overly impressed with watching him and in his time with the Raiders. And it's like a proven fact, like of like quarterbacks that have played like started like 150 games. Like he's the worst quarterback in the red zone like of all time in history. And so I was pessimistic about Derek Carr, but I was pessimistic, but a hopeful pessimistic. I just didn't want to get my hopes up too high that he's going to come in and all the Saints needed was a quarterback to be good. But I definitely wouldn't have been upset if that ended up being the case. But I'd seen Derek Carr. I'd seen him play, and I'd seen how bad he was in the red zone, and that was something I mentioned. That was a note that I made, is that some of the interceptions, like he throws interceptions, like this is probably the only thing that's comparable to him and Drew Brees, is that he throws interceptions, not a lot of them, not a ton of them, but when he does, they're terrible. They're horrible interceptions. Like almost pretty much every interception Derek Carr's thrown this year, he's thrown 5 of them. Like all of them have been literally just lollipops thrown right to defenders. And Drew Brees was similar to that. Drew Brees didn't make a lot of mistakes, but when he did, uh, he they usually look like probably like miscommunication or receivers not being on the same page, and him just throwing an interception right to a defender. But this was that pick six um, to Jesse Palmer was just awful, because he was throwing it to Rashid Shaheed and it looked like it was thrown behind him a little bit. But if it had been thrown on point, it was going to get intercepted anyways. But it was just the fact that it got caught like at the goal line in a running sprint, already in full sprint when he catches it. It's just the fact that it led to a pick six. Like it was probably the worst interception or pick six I've seen all year. It was just terrible. So to say that I'm somewhat out on Derek Carr would be an understatement, I think, because I even text my buddy that's a Raiders fan, and it was just like, man, Derek Carr, he's trash. He's a bum, and it's just hard to get around it. I just don't see that being fixed anytime soon. I think he is what he is, and he was just he was a bright young looking star back in 2016, and after breaking that leg and not having John Gruden as his head coach anymore, he's just kind of never really been the same. But so that just like killed the Saints there. Even moving on from that, they were able to move the ball pretty well. They ran it, were able to run it, but then you get behind like 2 touchdowns in a game, and this was another game. Like I just mentioned it, the time frame of like what 7 weeks in a row here. They've now allowed opponents to score 14 or more points in the first half. So the defense continuing its trend of that, but they didn't really carry over the fact that in a lot of those prior games is that then their defense would get a complete shutout in the second half. So that didn't happen. I know it was only 10 more points, but it was kind of by the way that it happened. But just how the game continued to unfold, the Saints defense played good, in stretches and in moments, like the two Tyrann Mathieu interceptions. Those were two key moments, but the Saints turnovers were much more critical and much more momentum changing. And the fact that the Saints only came away with like 6 points off of two turnovers, like two field goals off of two interceptions. Like that's the thing about those interceptions. None of them were like deep in Falcons territory. I think the Saints actually only got 3 points off of those, because the first interception by Tyrann Mathieu was like an interception around the goal line at the end of the first half. But the Saints were able to move the ball. That was the most frustrating thing about this game, is that the Saints had every opportunity to win it. Chris Olave, he was lighting it up. Every catch he was making looked like it was going for like 15 yards. Taysom Hill was doing it all, running, even receiving for the first time. Not for the first time, but had some looked like he was a critical target in the receiving game. And then Alvin Kamara just being his normal Alvin self. But I feel bad for him for having to be on a team that's so inept. But the final killer of this game was the Saints had an opportunity to take the lead. Finally, it was 21-15, I think, and they were in position to score a touchdown. They were down in the red zone again, and after like a 10-yard run by Taysom Hill, he gets the ball knocked out by who? Guess who? Again, he's back. Jesse Bates knocks the fumble loose, and that's the crazy thing about people. They clamor for Taysom Hill, and then the second they get what they want, they get like a rotten version of it or something. Like it's like a jinxed version of it. So you do what statistics and analytics say to do, and it blows up in your face. I honestly believe obviously it's a woulda, coulda, shoulda type of statement, but hell, you take away just one of those Saints turnovers, and I think the Saints probably win this game pretty comfortably. But that really wasn't the defining moment of this game, because the Saints were able to get another field goal, which would have been a fifth field goal towards the end of the game, when there was like 3 minutes left, and the Saints defense couldn't stop the run, couldn't get a stop at all. Like they ran it on like every play of that last drive. They ran it like trying to see. They ran like on every play on that last drive for them before the Saints ended up getting it back. But it ended up being like a 9-point game at that point. But the Saints just couldn't stop the run at the very end of the game. They were just getting gashed. It looked as if they had just like given up. So the Saints were still in it, but then just couldn't get them off the field. Yeah, they actually had a lot more than 3 minutes left. They had like 6.5 minutes left almost, and just couldn't get a stop. They literally let the Falcons just run off 5 minutes and add another field goal, and that was pretty much the end of the game. And some people I'm sure will point to Blake Grupe missing the field goal that would have gave them an opportunity, I guess, to kick an onside kick and maybe get the ball back and score a touchdown. But really, I have no problem with what Blake Grupe did in this game. Like if I was handing out player of the games or MVPs for the game, that's about one of the only players that would get it, because he was 5 of 6, which is an 0.3 completion percentage, makes. Yeah, made a 52-yarder, and then that's a total of 15 points. Obviously, it was all their points, and he had a long of 52. He missed the one at the end was a 53 or 54, but I mean, yeah, I don't know how you can be hard on the kid when he was literally the only offense they had. That's what's crazy about this game is that they had 7 trips into the red zone in this game and only came away with 5 field goals and two turnovers. That's just one of the craziest stats I've ever heard when talking about a defense and how inept they are. But this game was just, I would say, besides this game and maybe the Buccaneers game, our first Buccaneers game we've had, this was probably like the most like painful to watch. I would say that this game was more painful to watch just because, at least in that Buccaneers game, the Buccaneers, the Saints never really looked like they had like a chance to win that game. This was there for the taking. I don't believe the Falcons are that much better of a team than the Saints. That's what's just maddening. But I wasn't so because I didn't do a podcast leading into this. I didn't have like a player of the game or or a hot take or game pick or anything. But if I was after the fact, if I was given a player of the game, it'd be either Alvin Kamara, Blake Grupe, who I was just talking about, or Tyrann Mathieu, because those were about the only 2 players that played good, that were any good in this game. Like that's something I'm starting to see from this team. It seems like a lack of effort, or they don't really care anymore, or maybe this was something I was harping on in the off season are we going to slowly see Demario Davis and Cam Jordan and even Tyrann Mathieu, who had a great game? Are we going to see all those guys like age and become washed like right in front of our eyes? And it could be a little bit of that, but it could also be that they're just not very motivated with the current coach that they have. But yeah, if I was to hand one out post game, it would probably be um, Tyrann Mathieu, who had 3 tackles and on 1 assist, and had the 2 interceptions. There was 2 other like tip balls in the game that he came close to coming down with. So that I would say it's probably easy to say that was Tyrann Mathieu's best game this year. And then we went over Blake Grupe's stat. He's this game. He's what represented the Saints in this game because he's the only one that had any points. And then let's see, Alvin Kamara, he had 4 catches for 50 yards and 15 carries for 69 yards, which is a 4.6 yard average. So they had more than 100 total yards in this game. That's what's sad about this. This was the first time it looked like the Saints were able to actually run the ball with their running backs, but got down so early and had some horrible turnovers that they just couldn't stick to the run. So I would give it to him. And even Chris Olave was having a great game. It looked like he was about on his way to having about 14 catches and 200 yards receiving before he ended up getting hurt. But we'll go over that here in just a second. So yeah, let's get into the injuries, because that was just, that's what made this game even worse, was that the Saints have been pretty healthy all season for the most part. I feel probably 1 or 2 injury reports back. I feel as if I probably shouldn't have said anything, because I feel like they're cursed, and you bring up anything positive about them, it's gonna like automatically go to a negative. But the Saints were already kind of reeling coming into this game, missing Marshawn Lattimore, your shutdown elite top 5 corner in the league, and then probably more of just a vocal leader third wide receiver, but he was good in his position, in his spot. Michael Thomas also out of this game, so you're just thinking, I think Michael Thomas probably easy to replace. At least that would probably have been my thought. And then the Saints secondary has probably been their strongest unit all year. But then right as this game gets kind of going, you see that Rashid Shaheed's dealing with a hamstring injury or a knee injury, and he went out a couple times and then came back in a couple times before they finally just listed him out. And then still, the Saints are trying to get back in this game, and I honestly thought the offensive line played pretty good in this game. I think Derek Carr only got sacked one time, and it didn't seem like he was holding on to the ball too long when it didn't look like he had enough time. Situationally, he was protecting the ball pretty good, at least in that manner, like getting rid of the ball. But on one of these throws where it looked like he had all day to throw, and looked like Chris Olave had a step, he just like threw it up there and lobbed it up there, put way too much air under it, and this is something that we've seen twice last year with Chris Olave, is that Olave goes up for like this contested catch or jump ball, but then he's kind of like Tua Tagovailoa. For some reason, he doesn't know how to fall like that, so he pretty much just comes down back flat, and his back of his head hits off the turf, and that's I would, my math is correct. Chris Olave already just a year and a half into his NFL career, and he's already had 3 concussions. And that was something I was concerned about with Chris Olave. Just talking about him and his possible growth, and it looks like he had a little bit of a sophomore slump there for a moment, and because I didn't think he was good at contested catches and thought he was a little undersized, and yeah, it looked like he was gonna blow the haters out of the water in this game before that bad pass thrown up to him by Derek Carr, which you can't put that all on Derek Carr, because these receivers can't put it all on Derek Carr or Chris Olave, because sometimes you're put in situations that lead to collisions that you really have no control over, which that's definitely what that was. But that concerns me. So you go into this game with at least your 1 and 2 wide receiver, and then before you know it, you don't have any of your 3 top wide receivers. Like, that was considered like one of the biggest highlights and bright spots of this team, and now it's like they're in wide receiver purgatory now. And there's some other injuries as this kind of game kind of went along. Eric McCoy, he went out. Looked like it for a moment there that he might have broke his collarbone or something, but thankfully he was able to come back in the game. And then a similar collision, and this was kind of a dirty play where it was just kind of a football scrum, kind of a rugby scrum after a play, and Pete Werner kind of got blindsided, and he was coming up holding his shoulder and collarbone as well. But just seemed like every other play, Saints player was going into the injury tent or coming out of the injury tent, or wasn't even able to go in the injury tent because there was already too many play. There was already someone in there. But just gotta hope that none of those are serious injuries. The Saints weren't able to take advantage of the good health, but now they don't have that anymore, and that I think that was probably a big contributor for that last drive that they had against the Falcons, because they weren't able to stop the run, and that was because Cam Jordan, who's obviously like never hurt, has never really been hurt in his career. He went out of this game with a shin injury and didn't come back, and that seemed like Saints run defense was already struggling a little bit, but when he went out, it just went to complete garbage, So that's what the Saints are dealing with. They're still tied for first in the NFC South, even though they don't have like any of the tiebreakers because they've lost to the Falcons, they've lost to the Buccaneers. So they're 5-6. Falcons are 5-6. It's still possible to make the playoffs, but I mentioned just like 2 weeks ago after the Saints made it to 5-4 that may have been the brightest moment of the season. I think I'm sticking to that. I think that was probably the highest point of the season. I really just don't see how it gets any better from here. And so let's see, go over some notes, some kind of notes and things that have happened like since the week started, some things that probably got people screaming at the coaches. And I think I'm in the minority a little bit on these moves that the Saints, not moves that they made, but moves that they didn't make. So we're talking about Cam Jordan. We were just talking about Cam Jordan, how, once he went out of the game, the run defense went to hell, was no good. But man, he regardless of how good his run defense is, he's been like almost like non-existent in the pass rush game. I think he has like what, 2 sacks or something like that. And I'll even throw Carl Granderson under the bus a little bit, since kind of since he's signed his contract. I think a lot of people at first were saying, "Oh man, they got him on such a deal," but a couple games after he signed his contract, he's been kind of pretty silent as well. But with those issues at defensive end, people would think that the Saints would need Jason Pierre-Paul even more than they did before the game started. And the only reason he really got any snaps is because Cam Jordan went out. But Jason Pierre-Paul, he ended up having just let's see, just one solo tackle in this game, one like 1 or 2 tackles. I think like two total tackles, 1 assist, one solo. And so, of course, after the injuries and just the poor play in general of defensive end, people would think that you would want to keep Jason Pierre-Paul, or you would be afraid someone would poach him or something, or like you would add him to your 53-man roster. Well, the Saints didn't do that, and the Saints, it seems like teams love to poach Saints players, and he ended up getting poached away by the Miami Dolphins off the Saints practice squad. And I know seems like a lot of fans and people in Saints media are in an uproar as if that's like gonna kill their pass rush or something. That the pass rush is already dead. Losing Jason Pierre-Paul, a 34-year-old Jason Pierre-Paul, who hasn't had really hasn't had a good season since 2020, when the Buccaneers won the Super Bowl and he was a Pro Bowler and had 9.5 sacks. Since then, he's only had 5.5 sacks and only had like 3 last year. So I think a lot of people are in an uproar over losing him, but I think he's already washed anyways. And if he was so great, why hadn't he been signed to some team previously? And he even sent a thank you letter. He thanked New Orleans even before Anthony Davis did, and sent a thank you letter for the Saints giving him an opportunity at this point in his career. So the Saints were the first one to give him that opportunity, and he put it out there, and he's now going to a possible title contender. I actually feel better for Jason Pierre-Paul that he's actually going to a team that actually has some potential, some Super Bowl aspirations, like the Miami Dolphins. So people are all mad about losing Jason Pierre-Paul, thinking that's going to wreck their pass rush or something. They had their pass rush is in existence anyways. They've only had like 18 sacks like all year, which is it's either tied for second worst or is worst. I think the Chicago Bears only had like 15 or something. So Jason Pierre-Paul wasn't going to fix it, and this next player wasn't going to fix it either. So Derek Barnett who was a player that was really high on the Saints draft board back in 2017. I thought a lot of people thought the Saints may take him, depending on how the board falls. They may take him at 12 or yeah, 11. Where they drafted Marshawn Lattimore, or if he falls to 31st or 32nd, where they picked Ramchick, and they would pick him. But yeah, he ended up getting drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, winning a Super Bowl in his first season there, and looking respectable as a player. In those years that he's had there, he's had 21 and a half sacks, so not mind blowing or eye popping numbers or anything like that. But yeah, so they put him on a waiver wire, and the team that picked him up was on the list, the claiming list. The Texans were after the Saints, so another uproar from media and Saints fans about, well, your pass rush is so terrible, your run defense isn't much better. Like, why wouldn't you put a claim in for him? And just like Jason Pierre-Paul, he's literally done nothing since 2021 when he had 2 sacks. Since then, he's only played in 9 games and has no sacks and only has like 3 total tackles. So he wasn't going to come in here and change anything either. Like he's a little bit younger than Jason Pierre-Paul and Cam Jordan. So I kind of can see where I can say, well, maybe he's not washed. But at this point, I kind of want to just say that about Jason Pierre-Paul. He's washed. Cam Jordan's looking kind of washy, and Derek Barnett, I just don't think he's any good. He was a good enough player to start his career, but now he's gotten a little older, he's not even good enough to start. So I just wanted to clear that up. That a lot of people seem to be real upset about that, and are obviously pointing at coaching decisions, contract decisions, or control of the organization. Like who's making these calls? Is it Dennis Allen saying that he doesn't want Jason Pierre-Paul, or just doesn't have eyes on positions that are very, very monumental to the Saints' success, and just doesn't put an onus on keeping players like Jason Pierre-Paul, if nothing else, just for depth, or trying to get waiver claims on a player that has maybe some potential in Derek Barnett. So that's when, definitely after this game, you can't really, this game and the start of the week with the defensive ends that were not Saints, that didn't become Saints or didn't stay Saints. I just don't see how you can even really verbalize like backing the current team, current group coaching staff, that's coaching this team. I just don't know how you can continue to back them when they look terrible on offense. And even now with Dennis Allen, who's supposed to be a great defensive head coach, and he has been, and even in his first year, they were still good on defense. Like that, the defense isn't even any good anymore. So it's like, I just don't even understand why they're keeping Dennis Allen, why they're keeping Pete Carmichael. The only thing I'll say is I kind of understand why they're not at least firing Dennis Allen, is because who would you replace him for at this point in the season? I kind of feel the same way with Pete as well, Pete Carmichael, because I mean, who would you replace him with? Curry, or just the Saints? The Saints aren't a team to do that. They don't fire people in the middle of the season. But I definitely feel that Gail Benson or Mickey Loomis, whoever's in control of it, they were given enough reason to do it on Sunday. And man, I just don't see where it gets any better I think the Saints are who they are. You know, they are. I am who I am at this point in the season. I just don't see it changing because they're like worst in the league in sacks. They're like one of the worst teams in the league in the red zone, converting touchdowns in the red zone. They're like one of the worst penalized teams in the league. Like when you're the worst in multiple of those categories, it's just hard to be a good team. And I just don't, and I don't see it getting any better this season until they get new head coaches and a new regime in there. But yeah, this game was super depressing, and it was a little annoying there in that in the second half, where Saints just couldn't stop the run, and then it even looked like there was somewhat of a bright spot as if they might take the lead at the 21 to 15 mark. Then of course all your hopes and dreams of that happening got ripped away with a Taysom Hill fumble. But anyways, just I guess on to Detroit, which I don't envision being a pretty game or a nice outcome at all for the Saints. But I'm here for it. I hope it'd be interesting to see what the injury reports are come by Friday. I imagine it's not going to be pretty, but I guess there's some built-in excuses for losses now at least, because definitely had none of that early in the season. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you. So who dat? And can I get a check, please?